Mino Gishigad. Hello, everyone. My name is Cree Rose, and I'm the program manager for community engagement at Native Governance Center. I am enrolled in the Chippewa Cree tribe, so my peoples are currently out in Rocky Boy, Montana, but I'm actually living in my partner's hometown, which is Casa Grande, Arizona. And that is the homelands of the Tohono O'odham and Peepash peoples. And I'm just really excited to have this conversation today. And on behalf of NGC, just want to thank everyone for joining and tuning in. Native Governance Center, for those of you who are not familiar, is a Native-led nonprofit really supporting Native nations in strengthening their governance systems and their capacity to exercise their sovereignty. And so to share just a little bit about what we do work directly with Native nations in some of our programs like tribal governance support and tribal finance. We also have an incredible leadership program for individual change makers called the Native Nation Rebuilders Program. And we also provide tons of free events, resources, and different gatherings like this one for everyone to learn from. And so we just encourage you after today to check out our programming. You can do that by going to nativegov.org or by following us on social media at nativegov. Today's virtual event is Better Together, Partnerships in Health Across Indian Country, and we're really hoping to explore how Native-led collaboration is reshaping health systems and serving to advance our community wellness in a lot of different ways. And I'm excited that we get to learn from a group of really wonderful Native women leaders who are doing a lot of different work across public health, education, research, and community advocacy. And this is actually our second event in a mini series that's really just focused on the power of partnerships. And so we are going to be sharing recordings from these events out at the end of the month. And we're hoping to have a good amount of you come back and check out our final session next week on the 31st, which will be focused on governance partnerships. We are going to be recording this session and sharing that. And in addition to the recording, we're also going to be sharing out a written resource once these events are complete. So you can check that out later on for continued learning. Before we kind of dive into the content, we want to address just a couple housekeeping items and provide some context for today's event. First, just want to remind everyone that you can submit questions for our panelists by using the Q&A box here on Zoom. And we plan to transition over to that audience Q&A just around 12:50 Central Time. Today's webinar is also being closed captioned, so if desired, you can turn those on by using the button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I'm going to start off today's event with just a real short presentation on partnership basics, and then we're going to follow it up with that panel discussion, which I'm really looking forward to. And let me get those slides up, so just a moment here. But in providing some context for today's event, we want to talk about a little bit what good partnerships look like, but also provide some context for why these matter in health and wellness settings. And so today's speakers are going to be sharing really their own experience and their own knowledge when it comes to good partnerships. But at Native Governance Center, we do have a few best practices of our own that we wanted to share. And while this is not exhaustive, I think this is a good place to get a lot of folks started in their partnerships. And so some of our best practices include doing your own research. So ideally, before partnering, taking some time to learn more about that Native nation or community or even individual that you're trying to serve. And to do that, of course, having different conversations, but you can also try to pull through and really look at any data you have available to you. So understand who are these individuals looking for services, what Native nations do they represent, and try to look for opportunities to learn directly from Native nations and Native leaders. look at those Native nations and communities near you and try to find out what are some of their biggest priorities, what are some of their biggest accomplishments, and what are maybe some of their current needs for how you can partner and how you can work together. And then we also want you to consider really getting into a good headspace. So thinking about, are you in the right place to do this work? Maybe you have a whole ton of knowledge, but you're not going to be an expert in that new community that you're trying to serve. So this is an opportunity to really slow down, understand that while you might be the expert in your field, you're not going to be the expert in that community. And so be open to really pivoting, pausing, or maybe abandoning that idea you have once you are in partnership with that nation or with that community. And it's also really important that you work at the speed of community. That might be different from what you're used to. It might take some adjusting, but you want to align with that speed and really just demonstrate that you have a willingness to invest in a longer term relationship. You're trying to build trust and understand that building those relationships does just take time in Indian country. And I think something really important about Headspace is also just listening. Listening once, listening again, doing all the listening you can, and really avoid making assumptions about those folks that you're trying to partner with. Oftentimes, our communities have solutions in mind. And so if your plan doesn't look to embrace those existing resources or those existing ideas, your plan probably could use some refinement. And then we also really want you to think about and build in respecting sovereignty into these partnerships. And sovereignty, to provide just a really quick definition, is the natural right of a people to govern themselves. It means that Native nations operate as independent nations within settler occupied lands, and it guarantees Native nations the right to design and control their own futures. And I think that last point is really key when you're thinking about partnerships. Are Native peoples and Native nations being involved in every step of that decision-making process? Are you respecting any laws or treaties that might exist? And really consider how sovereignty might appear in the work that you do. And we want to provide a little bit of context for why Native health and wellness partnerships, excuse me, really matter. And so first, I think it's important to just acknowledge that there's a long history of harm from health practitioners, researchers, and institutions when it comes to Native nations and peoples. And we have been used unconsentedly for health research. We've had health decisions made for us by institutions or practitioners, and much, much more. And for generations, Native health and wellness practices were really criminalized in the US. We had our ceremonies, spiritual practices, and healing traditions outlawed, surveilled, and suppressed until really recently. And in some cases, that continues today. And then and now we're also seeing Native health and wellness knowledges and some practices being appropriated by non-Native peoples and industries. And almost always this is happening without permission, without context, and without any sort of partnership or benefit to the Native nation or community that knowledge is coming from. And so while we're not going to dive into all of the different harms today, this really is a key piece of continued learning for those working in health and wellness, because that harm continues to shape how our communities and how different individuals have relationships with health today. And it's important to also recognize that many different Native nations and peoples define health and wellness very differently from a lot of folks in mainstream society. And so often, this understanding of health really goes beyond the mental and the physical, and it extends to spiritual, environmental, and so much more. And our different nations also have unique understandings of health and wellness, often involving being in balance, operating as a good relative, and understanding that we have this interconnectedness with all beings. But it's really cool to see that across Indian country, Native nations and different Native leaders are really working to reclaim and change these health systems. So this includes Native nations that are choosing to go through the 638 self-determination process, where they're able to take control of their health facilities and really design health and wellness services that reflect their unique culture and community. And then we're also seeing a huge resurgence in traditional wellness practices, from coming of age ceremonies to food sovereignty movements and language revitalization, and land-based healing. And I think these efforts are really important to talk about because they're not separate from health. They really are part of our health. And so there's also a really cool growth in positive representation of health and wellness. So we're seeing Native leaders who are changing what care looks like from the inside out as clinicians, as researchers, educators, policymakers, and healers. And so that is something that is really exciting and really positive that we can look forward to. And then I also just want to uplift some powerful examples of partnerships. And I know our speakers today will have a lot more to share. And I just want to note that while there is a lot of work to be done, there are some great things happening already, like those individual leaders and Native nations making change I spoke of. There's so many cool health partnerships already out there. And so I wanted to uplift a couple of examples of those that you can find in different Native nations and communities. One example that I've always benefited from as someone who lives outside of my community is that many urban Native health organizations and health boards are operating in partnership with Native nations, with state and federal organizations or other nonprofits, and they're able to deliver a wide variety of services from dental care to behavioral health. And this is really critical for folks that live outside of their home communities. And then, in addition to these orgs providing this direct access kind of service, they're also providing space for community building, which is so important because in these urban areas, we get individuals that represent dozens, if not hundreds, of different Native nations. So these orgs are providing talking circles, community gardens, classes around cooking and dancing, providing traditional healing, and so much more, but they're often building connections in community and really strengthening the health of our urban relatives. And you can find some really great examples of this work being done by Native Health here in Phoenix, the Minnesota Indian Women's Resource Center in Minneapolis, and so much more. And then we're also seeing culturally relevant health happening in our reservation communities. So, this resurgence of traditional foodways, ceremonies, and so much more. And both in urban and reservation spaces, these partnerships demonstrate how health is interconnected oftentimes with our language, with art, and with storytelling. And leading the way in these efforts are oftentimes individuals who just have a lot of care and passion within their communities. So, want to uplift a couple that I know of out of the Standing Rock Reservation community. That includes Woju, which is doing some incredible things around bison, food, and health ways. And then we also have the Mini Waukoni Health Circle. And so, community orgs like this are really providing a lot of access for those living in their home communities currently. And then we also have folks like the Native Wellness Institute, which provides trainings for Native and non-Native folks who are maybe working or partnering with Native nations. And they provide so many cool opportunities for you to learn, both train the trainer kind of opportunities, and they really make an effort to indigenize their facilitation, which I think is something we can all learn from. And then we're also seeing Native nations using their unique cultures to approach healing services and treatment options within their community, which I think is really beautiful. Oftentimes, these programs are integrating best practices in medical treatment with cultural care and healing practices, which is able to best meet the needs of our people. And now, hopefully won't take up too much more time because I want to go into this wonderful conversation, but I want to briefly introduce some of the speakers joining us today. So our moderator today is Dr. Elena Eagleshield. She is married, a mother of five, and a language warrior from the Standing Rock Nation and three affiliated tribes. She holds her MPH from NDSU, a PhD in culturally sustaining education from the University of Washington, and Elena co-leads Ancestral Sisterhood and founded Ioitanla. Apologies to all my relatives. I am not a very good Lakota or Dakota speaker, but they blend healing, art, and activism. And she is a lead consultant for an American Indian Birth Center project, founder of the Miniwakoni Health Circle and the Native Family Learning Lodge, which are all focused on revitalizing, Indigenous language, culture, and health through community-based healing. We also have these three incredible panelists joining us today. First is Dr. Courtney Clausen. She is a research associate with the Johns Hopkins Center for Indigenous Health at the Great Plains Hub and the project and data manager for the Great Plains Together Overcoming Diabetes, which is a cultural and family-based type 2 diabetes intervention. She obtained her Bachelor of Science in Exercise Science at the Black Hills State University and a Master of Public Health in American Indian Public Health at North Dakota State University, and a PhD in Indigenous Health at the University of North Dakota. Her research involves the interconnectedness of Indigenous health from a holistic and strength-based lens. Also joining the conversation is Tara John from Navajo Nation. She went to school at Arizona State University and graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Nutrition and Dietetics, After completing her degree, she went on to work at Kids Zone Enrichment Program as a nutritional instructor, at WIC as a nutritionist, and at Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community as a community health educator. She went on to complete her internship at Phoenix Indian Medical Center, where, after passing her RD exam, she worked as an inpatient clinic. Oh my gosh, I can't talk. Sorry, y'all. Clinical dietitian. Currently, she works at Native Health as a registered dietitian who mostly focuses on diabetes education and prevention. And then finally, we have Katie Lynch, who is a researcher, engineer, and artist passionate about building Indigenous systems of care. She was born and raised in coastal New Jersey and graduated with an undergraduate degree in biomedical engineering from Rutgers University. As a PhD student in health infrastructures and learning systems at the University of Michigan Medical School, she is currently studying Indigenous conceptualizations of learning health systems and food sovereignty, which intersects in place-based learning, healing, Indigenous epistemologies, and community-based participatory research. Her research centers relationality and Indigenous data sovereignty and aims to move science and scholarship towards collective liberation. Outside of academics, Katie is also a 2025 Champion for Change with the Center of Native American Youth, a TEDx speaker, and a former White House intern during the Biden-Harris administration. In the future, Katie hopes to pursue a career in academia and work towards increasing awareness to culturally relevant healthcare interventions in urban and suburban Native communities. I am so excited to hear from these incredible Native women leaders and want to also provide them some time to introduce themselves. And so Dr. Elena Eagleshield is going to kick off today's conversation, and I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen here and go ahead and take it away once you're ready. Miigwech.
Yay! Pilamaya Cree, Midak Yapi, Elena Eagle Shodamat Yapi, Iu Hachante Washtenapi, Chuzapi, Wazia Ekdala Kota Mokocheki, Iu Waslate Kichna Haska Mataha, Michichaki Zapta, Tewitawaki Hila. Hi, everybody. My name is Elena Eagleshield. I am from the Standing Rock Nation and also the three affiliated tribes. This year, my husband and I are celebrating our 10th year anniversary. We have five children. Three of them were born at home, which is helped to lead my passion into, what I focus on and what I do with work is maternal health and birth justice, and as well as uplifting traditional teachings that center our languages and our life ways and the solutions that our ancestors have had since time immemorial to raise the level of health of our communities. um, and I'm also an NGC Native Nation Rebuilders Sacred Seven cohort. We kind of coined that Sacred Seven term. um, but I'm so privileged and honored to hold space today for the conversation with these powerful health leaders within Indian country that uplifts health practices and partnerships across Indian country, and just uplifting that word of partnerships, because when we talk about partnerships in Indian country, we really view it through a lens of kinship and what that means within our communities, because it encompasses um, a reciprocal relationship and responsibility to each other. And so I just want to encourage you all to grab your mini witoni or water, tea, or your wakaliapi or coffee, and get comfortable as you join us in this conversation. And as I turn it over and ask them to introduce themselves, Cree did this amazing bio intro, but I want to hear, as we hear them introduce themselves, their people, and how they actively raise the level of health for themselves and their community. I just want to highlight that this is more than just a panel. It's a circle of stories and strategies and shared responsibilities. And I'm so excited to hear from everybody. So I would love to start with Katie. If you would like to tell us a little bit about who you are and your connection to health work in Native communities.
Bojojaye, Katie Lynch and Dejnakas, Barawad mi and Dow, Nishnabe and Dow, Shishi Benek Nedabendagwes, Lenape Hoki and Doshpia, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Edayan. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on what time it is where you are. My name is Katie Lynch. I'm enrolled citizen Band Potawatomi, and I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Michigan Medical School studying health infrastructures and learning systems. As Cree mentioned, I was born and raised in coastal New Jersey, land-shaped, water-shaped, community-made. I was born and raised away from my community, very far from my ancestral homelands in Michigan, and far from Oklahoma, where my tribe is currently located, but was really lucky to be surrounded by really incredible, strong women in my life that really encouraged me to pursue a STEM degree. So I went to a marine science magnet high school, and I thought I wanted to be a marine biologist. Growing up in New Jersey. But once I started getting a little further along in high school, I realized that I wanted to help people and I really wanted to do something that would uplift my Indigenous community and provide a way for me to really give back and figure out ways that we can increase culturally relevant healthcare, both on our reservation communities and also in urban and suburban settings. So I ended up pursuing a degree in biomedical engineering, and I spent a lot of time in the lab, like 4 years of my undergraduate degree I spent in the lab. And by the time I was finishing up, I was like, I'm really thankful for this time, but I can't spend any more time in the lab. So when I was thinking about graduate school, I really wanted to kind of take a step back and think about things from kind of a more macro lens than micro in the lab. And that's how I ended up kind of in the public health side of things. And I really got into public health work and interested in the public health field because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I was a college, or no, I was a high school student graduating in 2020. So it really like disrupted my education. But I really saw the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on my Native community and on other Native communities. And that was really what spurred me to be interested in going into public health. Um, so yeah, as Cree mentioned, I've worked at the White House, at Merck, at the American Heart Association in health policy. So as much as I am a researcher and a scientist, I also am really interested in the policy aspect of how we can really support our communities throughout this. So yeah, Chimigwech, thank you for having me here. I feel so lucky and starstruck to be in this panel, because I'm just a student, I'm still learning, but I'm just excited to be in community with you all.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I definitely feel like that's a part of the whole ecosystem of our health is that we all are learning on different levels. And I don't know if it's a proverb or what, but where you're never too old to learn and you're never too young to teach. So I appreciate you, Katie. Courtney, if you could go next and tell us a little bit about who you are and your connection to health work in Native communities.
Yes, absolutely. And to my fellow lifelong learners, I feel like we're all definitely lifelong learners within this realm and within Indian country across the board. But Hami Takyapi, Jay Chawashte, Machapie, my Lakota name is Common Goodheart, and my English name is Courtney Clausen. I am Cheyenne River Lakota, originally from Eagle Butte, South Dakota. I grew up on the Cheyenne River Indian Reservation. Was Miss Eagle Butte at one point in my time. I am a mom to a 6-year-old little girl. She's growing so much. She's been part of my academic journey with me her entire life. She was born during spring break of my Master's of Public Health program, and so really just kind of have been integrating my motherhood journey, while learning about exactly what I wanted to be when I grew up, which I still feel like that's kind of a thing in a vein with the lifelong learning pathway. I am married. It's actually my husband and I's fourth wedding anniversary today. So I love that Elena had brought that up too. Grateful to be with my life partner out here in the Haystapa. I live away from home. I still am home just about every weekend or so, and love where I come from, and get to spend time with family out back on the res. I always knew that I wanted to be in the health realm. I started out wanting to be a cardiologist. I think I was like reaching really big. I don't know if many life pathways were really shared with us in school beyond like, oh, are you going to be a doctor or a nurse or a teacher? And so I think really a part of my path has really been like learning about what type of opportunities there are. I think the further I've gone in education, I've really learned about all the different ways in which we can help people and be there for our relatives and really show up in a good way in so many different spaces. I'm grateful to be part of a time where it seems as though we're getting less and less siloed. I think a lot of the silo conversations were happening as I was starting in my Master's of Public Health program. And from there, it's just been so beautiful to see it grow and grow and grow. I received my PhD in Indigenous Health at the University of North Dakota, and was grateful to move through that program as the first cohort among a lot of really incredible scholars. My PhD work was titled The Interconnectedness of Indigenous Health, Local, National, and International Influences. And so a bit of my previous work within the health realm has been the local influence was a cultural protocol guide for my home community, and just really working with elders and a community advisory board to look at the different ways in which folks who are outside community are coming in and moving and working within community. The national level, I conducted a policy brief on the dual participation within the food distribution program and SNAP together simultaneously as a way to combat food insecurity. And the international level is and still is, I say, we're working to get it published right now, a systematic review on type 2 diabetes among global Indigenous adult populations with the International Diabetes Federation. And so to tie it all together, I didn't necessarily know that I would be diving into the diabetes realm, but it's definitely where I feel at home. It's been incredible to see the different ways in which we can integrate our holistic health practices, from the exercise science and movement level to health and eating. I used to work with the American Indian Foods Program with the Intertribal Agriculture Council, and really getting to learn from so many incredible foods producers that are carrying forth traditional teachings and harvesting practices that are so important for our health today, and then tying that all in a grand scheme of how do you build programming and how do you look at different ways to combat health situations that are very, very critical for many of our communities. And so that brings me to my current work, which is with the Together Overcoming Diabetes project, situated at the Johns Hopkins Center for Indigenous Health. It's a culturally based family intervention. How right now it's in a pilot form. It's a waitlist clinical control trial, and so I'm managing an on-the-ground team of all Lakota researchers, which is incredible. It's been really great to be part of this team, to be in community, and to be in partnership with the Oyate Health Center Special Diabetes Program for Indians, and to get to carry forth this work in that way. But grateful to be here, Pilami Aye, for having me, and happy to meet you all.
Ooh, when you were tell your husband thank you for sharing you with us today, and I was just leeling in the background. Congratulations. Um, Thank you so much for sharing. I'll have a few comments, but I would love for Tara to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and your connection to Native health and community.
Yeah, so hi everyone. So yeah, it's Aisha Terjan Yushat Nakane Ashche Bashichin, but at Nidesha Che, Tachi Nidesha. So hi everyone, good morning. My name is Tara. I am from Phoenix, Arizona. Oh, sorry, my clans are the Mexican clan born for the red bottom people. Um, but I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. This is where I grew up. I moved here when I was about 10 years old. Before that, we lived all over the Four Corners area. I went to school at Crystal Boarding School. I went to school in Utah. I went to school in Shiprock. I went to school in Fruitland, and then finally, around 10 years old, we decided to live here. So, for the most part, as far as my education is concerned, I originally started off at U of A, thinking that I wanted to go into medicine because, kind of like Courtney had mentioned, I felt like there was this thing that was planted in me where it was either, yeah, you become a doctor or a nurse or a teacher. And so when I first started out my journey, it was that I thought I wanted to be a doctor. So I did everything I possibly could to lay that path out for me, and actually ended up burning out at around my senior year and ended up leaving. And so I didn't go back to school for about 2 or 3 years and ended up working as a caregiver, working as a tutor. And after I took some time off, really evaluated and thought, like, what do I want to do? Like, what do I want to be? Um, and I decided to go ahead and take some classes at my local community college and thought nursing, because, if you're not going to be a doctor, you're going to be a nurse. Um, and after I started the prerequisites for nursing school, I took a diet. One of the classes that were taken was required was a class for nutrition, and I there was just this complete awakening in me, like, oh my goodness, like I can do something with food. I can do something with nutrition. I can, I kept thinking of all of these moments popping up in my head, with ceremonies, with functionings back home, with even something like butchering sheep. I just all these things kept popping up in my head and sort of piecing together inside of my brain. Um, but being someone who had already like felt like she failed one time, I kept thinking I can't fail at another thing. So I went ahead and decided to double on my courses and still do the prerequisites for nursing, and then also do the nutrition and dietetics portion too. So as I was going through my school and as I was going through my classes, and taking more of these, biochemistry and macro and micro nutrition classes, that's when it all started to make sense to me about how, all of these things that my grandma would talk about, like the how the food changes and how you can change food by adding in these certain ingredients. All of these things just started making sense to me inside of my head, how I can take this information and then apply it to my community. And so after that, I went ahead and told myself, this is what I want to do. I want to be a registered dietitian. I want to talk to people about nutrition. I want to be able to take these complex, what people, these complex systems and being able to break it down in a way that is, um, break down and then reshape it into something that I would like to see, something that I could use. Um, and that's pretty much what I have been doing since I graduated with my degree in nutrition and dietetics. And so that's pretty much my passion. Food really is my passion. I love talking about nutrition. I love, taking food and talking about and applying it to diabetes and talking about how these foods break down inside of our body. I like talking about it with kids. I like talking about it with adults. Um, and yeah, so that's a little bit about me. So, and then thank you so much for having me too.
Yay! Yes, you each are very powerful in the work that you do and definitely meant to be here to share your knowledge. Um, I feel like a little bit about things that had come up was like the ways that health shows up in Indian country around food, around the healthcare that we've seen growing up to now. My mom and dad worked in the healthcare field. My mom was a nurse, my dad was a CHR. Back then, we didn't have ambulances on Standing Rock. And so I remember as a CHR, my dad's little radio would go off and he'd grab a light and just magnet it on top of the car and we'd whip around and they were like the first responders. And so I always say, like, that probably wasn't legal back then, but that's how they, our communities have always done what we needed to do. And so when thinking about how non-indigenous communities see the way that we look at health and education and all these things is we never used to be siloed, like Courtney had shared. That I think that started when funding started to become allocated, and so I'm sure there's all kinds of reasons why that happened, but I do feel like funding's a big one. And so when we think of our responsibility to community, I feel that everyone has a role. um as we see, there's folks in diabetes and dietitian and birth work and all these different, and so I also feel like our allies have roles. And so when we think of the resources that they have or that they can share, or as each of you think of the work that you currently do, what are some best practices that non-native groups or individuals can follow to try to build authentic, respectful partnerships in native health? I could call on anybody or whoever would like to go first.
Hi. I can go ahead and go first. So as far as my best practice, the thing that I always try to keep in mind is communication. I feel like for me, that's always the best place to start communicating. And then on top of that, hosting meetings. I know oftentimes meetings are sometimes seen as something like, oh, that could have been shared in an email, or, oh, I don't really think this meeting really served a point. But for the most part, every single time I think that a meeting does take place, that is an opportunity for communication to happen verbally. Um, I feel like my best form of communication happens when it's word of mouth. And it's even the same in Native communities too. I know that when I've been working in community, it's how most people tend to hear about events or hearing about other activities that are happening is somebody told them, word of mouth. I mean, you could do all the advertising you want on social media, but for the most part, it's mostly, yeah, for me, it's communication, being able to I think somebody had mentioned being able to, yeah, being able to come into these other community, yeah, so it's communication. I'm sorry.
No, I totally agree. And I think just really emphasizing the authenticity part of the question and making sure that folks are showing up in an authentic way. Positionality is a big deal, especially when going into um, Native communities and just working with Native-led organizations, exactly how we did within this call. Like what brings you to this work? What have you experienced in your life path that's brought you here? And then really reflecting on why you're here to do the work that you're doing, reflecting on whether, is it something that's just a personal interest? Is there a personal experience that you've had that has brought you to this work? Um, what are ways that things that you've experienced in your life might influence the way that you're showing up within community, and really kind of just reflecting within yourself of why you're wanting to be within Native communities, and then also just not forgetting to laugh. I think that a lot of folks really think that everything is all serious all the time. And I think that there's a lot of power within humor. You know that you've built a good relationship with your partner when they start roasting you or joking with you. And so just kind of really like focusing on who you are and making sure that you're showing up as your best self within community, and um, letting the community lead, and not even necessarily letting the community lead, but coming in with the mindset that the community will lead, and that you're just, you're there to make sure that you're a support in whatever way that you can be to help push forth community priorities. A lot of times folks will come in with an idea of like, oh, I'm so excited about increasing the intake of omega-3s, but the community, might have a complete different idea of what they're wanting to look at, what priorities are happening within their community, and really current and critical day-to-day experiences that are happening. And so just kind of reflecting on that and making sure that you're being a good advocate and helping push forth community priorities.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what's been said already for sure. I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is just privileging the authority of community members as knowledge producers. I think especially as a researcher, as a PhD student, it can feel like, oh, maybe like you're the one that holds the knowledge, but in reality, I think the community members are the ones that know what's best for them. And especially in our communities, like we don't see knowledge as a right, it's a relationship. And I think that there's so many different intertwined concepts and things that come into play when people are sharing knowledge with you, because we don't just see knowledge as like data or something that you would like write down on paper, right? Like our knowledge is in our food and in our stories and in our culture and in our language. Like there's so many different things that we would consider to be knowledge. And just because it's not considered quote unquote knowledge in a Western construct, it doesn't mean that it's any less valid. And I also am reminded like you have to do the work even if it's not glamorous. I think like if someone came into my community and wanted to like partner with us, we'd be like, okay, get in there, like go help with the fry bread, go chop some wood. Like I think a lot of the work of community building and partnership building is really just like spending time in community. It's not like you going in there with a clipboard. It's really like going and doing the work and building the relationships, and then you come out with the clipboard later once you have those relationships developed and the community is really the one that's leading things. Um, and then the only other thing I would mention is really like understanding the history that a community you're working with is has faced, but also approaching from a strengths-based perspective whenever possible. I think as like I guess I'm still considered a native youth, depends on when you have that cutoff. But they would consider me, at least in Center for Native American Youth, still a youth. But we are constantly told like there's so many things that are wrong with us. You come from this trauma and all of this. And like as much as that's true, I feel like we also need to get away from, starting conversations with that. I oftentimes use the word survivance instead of resilience because I think a lot of the times like, we shouldn't have had to be resilient in a lot of the things that our communities have been through. So I really like to use the term survivance because it shows like how much our knowledge systems and our cultural practices have allowed us to persist in these systems. And I think that's really powerful and something that I try to remind myself as well as I'm navigating this PhD program.
Yes, hold on to that youth as long as you can, because I think I was like 26, still trying to be a youth. 35 now. But I think all of you made some amazing points about what it means to be in community and to let the community lead, because there are so many words that people use to describe who we are and how our communities work, but helping them even to shift that mindset of like, we didn't lose our languages, they were actively stolen from us. We didn't lose midwifery or the ways that we practice birth. Those things were stolen and we were forced to do things in a certain way. And so I think when I think of what it means to be in community, we grew up just, having being in community, but for these non-Indigenous folks who need terminology and need all these different acronyms to help guide their work, one of the professors that is a mentor of mine and I really appreciate and love her is Dr. Karina Walters, and she reframed CBPR, which is community-based participatory research, and she said indigenized community-based participatory research. And the way she framed it is like it centers Indigenous folks and the ways that they want to see work happen, but it also frames it like you can be Indigenous, but still not do Indigenous methodologies or work. And so when you think of it as an Indigenous way, it's like I'm Lakota, but I can't be in other communities thinking I know what they want because we're all Native, you know? And so it's like we can also perpetuate some of those things. And so how are we also walking our talk, you know, and being guides for non-natives to work within our communities? And so thinking about that, our communication and the tools we have and all of the folks that we have to be able to look towards, how can Native people advocate for health solutions rooted in culture, language, and relationships? And what support do we need to do this more widely? Again, whoever wants to go.
I feel like there's a lot of different ways that we can integrate culture, language, kinship, which has been talked about within this call, into everyday spaces. And your programming and your projects, there's a lot of organizations that are doing like a Lakota word of the week or a different language practices like that, which I know are a little bit um, on the smaller end, but honestly, when you think about it, like any initiative like that is really impactful, especially considering the ways in which our cultural ways have been stolen, have been suppressed, and have been impacted over time. And so just making sure, again, like that you're showing up in a good way, that you're opening events in a good way with prayer, intention setting, you know, however makes most sense for your organization. um, there's a lot of really cool initiatives that also do things like integrate language into nutrition messaging or integrating um, different just different concepts into the work that you're currently doing. And I think that there's a lot of small ways that you can do that, but a lot of the small ways, once you start adding them, become big parts of the programming that you're offering forth. One of the things that we've done within our programming is we've made sure to integrate Lakota language practices into the curriculum that we're offering, but also to have like language practice to hold space for having conversations of where, you know, we're not the experts of bringing forth what types of conversations we're having about culture, and really learning from our relatives or participants who are within the program about what their practices are, and really making sure that you're being respectful and holding space for the fact that there are different protocols within community, as Elena had mentioned. What I've learned and what I've been taught in my community isn't even necessarily the same as what a cousin may have learned from a similar community really close by. Like there's a lot of different protocols that come into play, but I think it's really about the intention and the energy that you're bringing into each situation.
Yeah, I think that thinking about like what do we need to do in order to really advocate for ourselves, we really need to be able to tell our own stories. I think a lot of the time there's so many narratives that have been written about us instead of us being able to really like articulate for ourselves what matters to us. There's a really incredible Ojibwe professor coming to Michigan in the fall, Dr. Tara Maudry, and she did a project where she was able to interview community members about ways to define nutrition from Indigenous worldviews. And she was talking to someone, and he had mentioned like it matters who defines it. It matters that we're able to define these things for ourselves and that we don't need to rely on Western conceptualizations of things that we have always known and defined in our own ways. And then there's also a incredible professor, Dr. Autumn Blackdeer, and she kind of referred to the analogy of like getting a seat at the table, and she was talking about how like she not only wanted to like flip the table but chop it up and make kindling for community building. And I think about that a lot in this work as well. Like it's not about getting a seat at the table with these people that have never cared about our people. We need to make our own table and figure out what matters to us. because we are scientists. We've always been scientists. Like we have always known about what our communities need to be healthy. So I think that is something that I'm often reminded about in this work as well. And from a tangible perspective, we really need funding and advocacy and capacity building in our communities. I think a lot about education as a student and someone that does a lot of work in like the higher education and land grant space. Like we need to push more Native students to feel comfortable in spaces of STEM and medicine. Like we need more Indigenous doctors and Indigenous scientists, and we don't need more people or more non-Native people coming into our communities. We need to really build up our own communities to have the capacity to do that own health work and data work and story work and all of those things that our communities have been practicing since time immemorial. And I think as was mentioned before, like that's also tied in with like culture and language revitalization. I grew up in coastal New Jersey. I've always been so connected to the water, which I found like really interesting because as Potawatomi people were fire keepers. So it's like, why am I so like connected to water? Like, we're supposed to be fire keepers. And I was talking to an elder and they were like, no, Katie, like Potawatomi women and Anishinaabe women are water protectors. Like, that makes so much sense to me now. And I was talking to a friend and she was like, imagine like if that was something as simple as that is something we can learn from our language, imagine what else we can learn just by learning our language. So I think that, like was mentioned before, there's so many of these aspects that are really intertwined with health as well.
Um, and then I thank you so much for sharing. And I do agree that I do agree with language and culture and being able to implement that. And for me personally, I do really like the idea of sharing your story. And as far as being able to integrate these things and advocate, I think the healing sort of to start with myself first. So I grew up outside of the reservation. We left when we were 10 and didn't really grow up hearing my language and didn't really grow up with a lot of exposure to a lot of the ceremonies. And with that carried quite a bit of shame with not knowing most of these things. And I think once I was able to sort of heal that and, be able to reconnect with my language, talking to my elders, like asking them, how do I pronounce these words? And kind of getting over that little teasing too that I would sometimes get when I wasn't pronouncing things correctly. Or even just going in and asking them, like, how do I prepare these foods? How do I cook these foods? How do I carry out these ceremonies? Once I was able to get comfortable in that atmosphere, I think after that, then I was able to start feeling the confidence to be able to take this information and apply it in my own way. Um, and so even if you're not the most confident out there with applying some of this information, um, you'll get there. It just takes a little bit of confidence and it does take a little bit of asking and a little bit of humility before you completely throw yourself in or just throw yourself in.
I appreciate you all sharing so much. I think there's a lot of just different pathways and themes about her having a seat at the table or tearing the table down and making firewood or however we want to think about it. I feel like it's important for our partners and the folks who are non-Indigenous, non-Native to think about why we are so why it's so important for our people to lead and why we've been so oppressed and haven't had these seats at the table. Part of it is because we didn't, a lot of us didn't grow up in community. And so we're working on that confidence and those connections. And I just want, all of you to know, and I'm sure and the listeners who are um, reconnecting or finding ways that you're enough and you can learn your language, and it's a responsibility for you to find out who your people are and practice your languages and your ceremonies, and don't ever let anybody tell you that you can't. And I think of like partners who are non-native to give us that space as we're figuring out how we show up in these places, because there are so many non-natives who are very, eloquent and could write up a RFP or a proposal and pull a Native team together, but then they are the ones holding it. I just encourage all of you to take a step back and think about why you're doing this. Or if you can, pass it on to a Native person and encourage them to apply for these things, or encourage folks to make sure, like, look around at your table and look around in your office and your board and your surroundings and make sure that there are people there, because it's not for lack of us wanting to be there. It's this systemic oppression who has told us that we shouldn't be there, we don't deserve to be there. And so I'll close it out with this question, and then we'll take some Q&A after this. But I'm just so proud of all of you and all of the things that you've shared so far. And I want to kind of do like a, just a, for you to think about what keeps you going in this work and how do you hope it inspires others.
I can go first. I have been thinking about this question a lot because I'm like, like what is keeping me in this PhD program? But I think it's really about like the people that I've been able to surround myself with. When I was in undergrad, I was one of about like three Native students that I knew of out of about like 50 to 55,000 students. And it was really lonely. It was really difficult to be a Native student in that institution. I was constantly met with administrators that didn't care about Native students. We had no land acknowledgement until my sophomore year, despite Rutgers University being quote unquote older than the United States. And we still don't have any physical space on campus for Native students. We had one Native professor in the entire university. Like, there's so many things that were, in the way for me to graduate and for me to be successful. And to now be at the University of Michigan on my ancestral homelands, where there's an entire Native student organization, and we have multiple Native professors. Like, I think it's really the connections that I've been able to develop here are really what keeps me going, because this work is not easy, and especially in institutions that were not built for us, it's hard to find space to just exist as a Native person. And I feel really grateful for our Native student organization that just allows me to like be a Native person and bead and just hang out with people and talk and share stories. Like, I don't always have to be this like academic researcher. Like, I can just be myself and I don't have to worry about like having to put on this like academic front. So I think that's definitely something that keeps me in this work. And in terms of like how I hope it will inspire others, I just hope that I can inspire like other young girls in my community to pursue STEM degrees. As I mentioned, I wasn't raised in community. I didn't start learning my language until I was in high school. And I just didn't really think that I could ever be in a PhD program, let alone graduate with an engineering degree. But I really want to, encourage those young Native kids from my community that like they can do this and that there's people around them to support them in that work.
I can go. What inspires me in this work is my grandparents, those who are still here and those who have passed. I had mentioned that I didn't necessarily intend on being within the diabetes realm, but it really has been quite a bit of a homecoming. There's a lot of experiences from just growing up and being exposed to different health um, aspects that have really come full circle for me in my journey. And so a lot of that is tied into my grandparents. My great grandpa always encouraged me to go as far as I could with education, and I took him very, very literally with my educational journey, but also my daughter, my nephews, my nieces, and just wanting to help create a better world in which everything that they know is culture, everything that they're able to learn within life is to be able to have that within their upbringing, and that's happening. I mean, that's been happening with my nephews. They've got to grow up, as firekeepers, and my daughter, she gets to go to a Lakota immersion school, and it's just really beautiful to get to see how powerful our lifeways are when you're able to practice them every single day, and not just because, you know, you're checking a box, but because it's part of your day-to-day experience. And then also, I just want to encourage people to we all are different pieces of the puzzle in the world. And we're different pieces that really help keep this world balanced. And so if you feel like, you know, you're a little bit outside this sector, you know, there's a lot of different ways in which your life experiences have built you to be the exact person that you are today. And nothing is random. Everything that you've learned has taught you some sort of lesson, whether it's a lesson to pivot and make your way back to a path forward that you're meant to be on, or a teaching that you know, you pulled from your undergrad and you're like, wow, like I had no idea that was going to apply to my life today. And same with just learning within community. So just really being open to the things that are coming into your path, the things that are lighting you up at any given time. Know that they're not random and that you are needed, and there's many different ways to contribute to healthful solutions within our communities. And you do not need to be an expert in order to do so. Just need to be a good human, and remember that we're all related. Mitaku Yayasi.
Um, so I definitely share a lot of the same things with everyone. What keeps me going with my work is uh, just like everyone had shared, just really working on building and surrounding myself with healthy communities, surrounding myself with people who share the same passion as I do, and and looking for those people too. Before, you know, I had mentioned that when I first started out my journey and everything, when I was really young, I did end up leaving school. And when I look back at it, I probably wasn't surrounded by the most positive of influences. However, you are able to find your way back. You are able to find your passion. You just have to keep moving forward and keep looking for those things that like Courtney had mentioned, that light you up, that inspire you. I got, you know, I'm so happy that I found the path that I'm on. I love what I get to do. I love my community, and that is who really keeps me going, is my community, my family, grandparent, my mom, my dad, my little nephew. And also, what really keeps me going too is that as I get older and start to enter my elderly years, is that I get to pay it forward. You know, I get to help set somebody on the right path, and offer that compassion, that humility, and that guidance that I was so privileged to get, as I was, you know, making my way into nutrition dietetics and into the career path I am in right now.
Thank you all for sharing. I want to encourage everybody to use the Q&A link or tab at the bottom, um, and ask any questions. You see these amazing health leaders that are doing beautiful work and have been developing, you know, this huge knowledge base that's built off their understanding of the world, you know, mixed and linked up with their community knowledge, their elder knowledge. And so if there's any questions that are coming up right now, there's a question in the chat that I'll just ask. Somebody just shared, thank you so much for this discussion, so valuable, and I am learning a lot. Do you have any suggestions, as I am in a new and very important role as a tribal liaison for Colorado? Any help would be appreciated. Where to start? um and so if any of you feel like you want to answer, if you want to take a quick sip of water and I can answer, or we could all, you know, go back and forth. But maybe thinking about how, when you first started, you know, the positions you're at or the programs you're in. I remember when I first became the director of tribal health for Standing Rock, I was like, me? I was in my like early 20s and I was so nervous, had no idea how I was going to go about it. And I ended up meeting with a community elder, and they were like, you have the heart and love for your people, so you're already qualified. And I was just bawling because I was like, okay, I don't want to mess it up, but I really, wanted to do good. And so I think making sure in Colorado, I'm not, the tribal liaison, whatever the communities are that are in the area, reaching out to them, making connections. I don't know if it's in education or health, but just making connections with those tribal programs or departments. And really, again, this is CBPR in action, ICBPR, Indigenous Community-Based Participatory Research, is asking how you can serve them and how you can make connections for them or what it is that they need. I feel like that's a really good start. And I don't know if Courtney, if you have another comment, we'll start there.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, yeah, really just there's a few things that have come up on the call today too about really learning about the place in which you're situated. If you're not originally from the area, maybe learning about the historical influences that have happened within the lands in Colorado now, the bounds of what is now known as Colorado, and what tribal nations, like whose lands you're part of, and just really kind of grounding yourself within community and getting to learn and taking the time to get to know who you're working with and what their priorities really are.
All right, Tara, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I do want to piggyback off of what Katie had mentioned earlier. She mentioned so beautifully that when you come into a community, you're not the expert. And keeping that in mind, I had to learn that the hard way. I so I took a job in a community outside of my own, and coming in as a nutritionist slash dietitian, I kept thinking in the back of my mind, like, this is it. Like, I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna create this new recipe, and everybody's love it. And I went in there, I made it for everyone, and everybody kind of licked it a little bit, and they just kind of looked down at it and said, "Oh yeah, this is great, this is delicious." Um, but then when I looked inside of the trash can, it was all in there. um, and I was really embarrassed and I was humiliated because I just thought, "Oh my goodness, like I thought I really landed it." I went in to go talk to my supervisor and I asked her, like, what what did I do wrong? And she was like, well, did you ask the community what they wanted? Did you did you ask them? Maybe if you would have asked, then they would have told you. um, so just, even just starting from there, coming in and just humbling yourself and acknowledging that this is a new space and they are the experts and you are there just to help collaborate.
Katie, do you have anything to add?
I think Courtney and Tara covered most of it.
All right. Well, remember there's the Q&A if anybody has any further questions, but maybe we could dive into another question around partnerships and anything positive that you all have experienced. Maybe thinking of a story of a partner that you worked with that was either non-native or native from another community that you want to uplift and share, and maybe how you navigated that. We'll start with Tara this time.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, when I think of a particular story in mind, the one that I always think of was I wanted to do a food demonstration and again, being Navajo, working in a community outside of my own, I just kept thinking, like, should I use, the traditional foods from the community, or should I try to integrate something of my own? I wasn't really sure where to go from there, but I went ahead and decided to shoot my shot and do blue corn mush. I I knew the health benefits of this food, knew the health benefits of the juniper ash. I could really make it my own, and I could talk about the health benefits and talk about how it was a native researcher who discovered how, or who came up with how much calcium is inside of the juniper ash. And I'm really glad that I did do it, because what ended up happening was someone from the community actually ended up reaching out to me and saying that they really did like the food demonstration. They liked that I shared about the health benefits of blue corn mush. And then that's when it opened up the conversation of, them talking about the health benefits of their own traditional foods. One of the foods that they started talking about, I'm out here in Phoenix, and one of their traditional foods that they said was a good source of calcium was the cholla buds. And these foods that sustain our communities. And so I thought it was, a really great way to open up the conversation and just start sharing about our traditional foods. And then they ended up doing a whole presentation for us on their other types of traditional foods in the community. Um, but that was, that's always one of the stories that comes to mind is putting yourself out there, letting someone know a little bit about you and making it personal to you too. Because it really can just sort of help break down those barriers and really open up a conversation between you and somebody else who's just as passionate about food as or whatever it is that you're passionate about too.
Thank you. Katie, would you like to answer?
Yeah, it's funny, Tara, that you brought up blue corn muffins because I was just around a bunch of my Navajo friends and I was talking about how much I miss like blue corn muffins when I was in Arizona. So they sent me like blue corn muffin mix. It's in a box next to me right now. But yeah, so good. Yeah, I think for me, when I think of positive partnerships, something that comes to mind is our Indigenous Collaborative Garden here on the University of Michigan campus. So the University of Michigan has one of the largest ethnobotanical seed collections in the country, and most of those are indigenous seeds that were stolen by the university. Um, for a lot of those seeds, we actually have information on like where they came from. So part of the work that's being done in the Indigenous Collaborative Garden is one, rematriating those seeds through a small plot of land that we have at our botanical gardens and arboretum, and then also using the space to build a medicine garden for Native students on campus. So this past year, we grew Bear Island flint corn, Odawa beans, and then I forget what type of squash. I think it was might have also been Odawa squash, but it was a Three Sisters garden. So we were able to kind of like grow those seeds. The native students were the ones that were like planting it and caring for the garden all summer. And then we did a harvest and we were actually able to eat like the Three Sisters that we grew at our fall feast. So we had like Three Sisters chili and a whole bunch of other wonderful food that were all grown from the garden. And we also are growing odamen or strawberries. And there's a lot of other things that are being talked about that we might start growing in the garden. So yeah, that's a partnership that was started, I think many, many years ago, but has now been started by Shiloh Maples, who's an incredible Anishinaabe seed keeper. And there's some really incredible work going, but it's really awesome to see like the students themselves being able to steward the garden and the seeds. And in the future, we're hoping to like proliferate the seeds so that we can then give them back to the folks that they were stolen from, in terms of the seeds that we're able to identify, like where they came from. So yeah, that's something that I think is really awesome. And I hope that more universities are able to do with their seed collections. And also has been really great for our Native students to be able to start thinking about having a medicine garden just accessible for them when they need it.
It's so cool to get to learn from everyone too about everything that's happening and all the beautiful work. The current partnership, which it's a current partnership for us with the Johns Hopkins Center for Indigenous Health and the Special Diabetes Program for Indians, is just being situated within the Oyate Health Center. We're grateful, so grateful to be able to have space up here within community. It really feels like coming home and getting to see folks that I either grew up with or have known throughout life, and to get to joke with folks. One thing, and many things that are really powerful about at least the Oyate Health Center. I feel like I have like this big starstruckness with just getting to be within this center, because there's like a smudge room. There's right here within the SDPI area, there's a gym that's situated right next to where you receive your care. There's a kitchen that's set up to be able to be a food demonstration kitchen. And really, what excites me about this partnership is the many opportunities that we've got to discuss. We're really early on within our partnership, but we have a lot of really cool conversations about what types of events we could host within the food demonstration kitchen to be able to tie that into diabetes care. Another part of our program that we're able to offer, at least for our relatives that are within the project, are HbA1c measurements that we can get back to relatives within about 5 minutes. And so another conversation that we're starting to have is how can we look towards getting that type of resource in for community, and really show our reciprocity for the way that the Oyate Health Center and the Great Plains Tribal Leaders Health Board has really kind of held space for us within community as we're starting out as a new hub in the Great Plains region.
Awesome. So I have a question about there have been so many different ways that our communities have had partnerships that maybe don't exist anymore, like as they're grant funded or whatever the reason why that the partnerships don't continue. I think one of the questions that I'm thinking of is that if harm is done or trust is broken between non-native partners or other partners that exist around us, do any of you have any support or guidance on how institutions or non-Indigenous partners can repair trust if they've caused harm? Or what are some ways to continue to either work together or decide that maybe it's not a good fit? If there's any examples that you have, or just any advice or guidance to give folks.
I feel like Katie's example was beautiful for that, especially with the rematriation of seeds within the work that she's been part of, but also really integrating Indigenous-led solutions. Like there's our ethics curriculum that really focuses on research-related harms that have happened within Indigenous communities, and so really looking at different sources of Indigenous-led and Indigenous created sources that help prepare and prevent harmful situations, but also are there to lean upon if harmful situations have potentially happened. I would start with that. I love the R ethics curriculum. I think it's a really great addition to the research realm.
I think it really starts with accountability from an institutional perspective, and the honesty of the institution to like acknowledge the harms that have been caused is something that seems so simple, yet so many institutions are just not willing to do. Specifically, even just thinking about like land grant universities and the education level, like Rutgers as a land grant university has made so many promises in terms of like becoming a land grant that is not upheld, but yet it refuses to like take accountability for those things. So I think a lot of the times, like as hard as it might be for institutions to admit that they've caused harm, that's really the first step in like repairing that relationship with the community. And then also understanding that the community might not want to continue or like work on a future partnership together. And the institution having a responsibility to like accept that the community like wants to stop collaborating or stop whatever that relationship might be. Because at the end of the day, like our communities have been harmed in so many different ways, and sometimes just like ceasing that partnership might be the best for the community. So I think just like institutions leaning in towards like whatever the community wants to do is something that's really important. And yeah, the Indigenous Collaborative Garden is something that was really Indigenous led. Like Courtney mentioned, that wasn't something that was like spurred by the university itself. I think it was like either an Indigenous student or a professor or a community member that led that. Um, and there's also things like the Inclusive History Project at the University of Michigan that are trying to work towards creating like equitable futures in higher education. But again, like it needs to be led by Indigenous people. It needs to be created with our people in mind, and our voices need to be at the center of it.
I think part of it is also just time and being realistic with how much time it could possibly take to heal those relationships. It's not going to be, probably not going to be something that's within a year or within 2 years. Um, and what Katie had mentioned too is that there is possibly a moment where you do have to sort of step away and revisit it later on. I do think that the healing that does take place isn't linear, it's very much circular. And so you may just have to work on whatever, work on yourself, work on rebuild or working on your own community before revisiting wanting to rebuild these partnerships. So just acknowledging that it might take a couple of years before you see anything being built again.
Beautiful answers. And if there's no more Q&A, we'll close out with what I feel like is a really beautiful futurisms question. So I just got back from Toronto yesterday. One of the projects that I'm working on is supporting a Native American Indian Birth Center in the Twin Cities. And we got to visit a beautiful birth center on Six Nations called Jinue Yanaglasta, and it means where they will be born. And one of the things that they discussed was how they're 30 years in, almost 30 years in, and they've had to really continuously exert sovereignty in the ways that they practice midwifery and uplift traditions and support the birthing families. And so I am so inspired. I left so inspired. And so as you think of like the future of Native healthcare and Indigenous health, what do you imagine Native sovereignty and wellness looking like when it's fully honored? And even though it's messy in the beginning, how can you encourage either yourselves or each other or our other community to fully step into that sovereignty? And we'll start with Katie.
Oh no. Um, yeah, I think Indigenous futurisms are something that are constantly coming up in my work. And my advisors are really amazing, and they often ask me like, what is the future that you envision? Like, let's work with you and how can we help you build that? And I think, we're really privileged here at Michigan to have like a huge academic medical center. And I think for me, I'm really like envisioning like Indigenous medical centers that like are full of Indigenous doctors, and that are like completely based in our knowledge systems. And I also, I think about our communities rematriating their land. Like I drive through, or last summer I was able to drive through like the land allotment that used to be owned by my family in Oklahoma. And of course, like we don't own that anymore, but there's so many of those that exist. And I think about like, how amazing would it be for us to be able to get our land back and to be able to grow our ancestral foods in the places that they were meant to be grown. And I think, relationality is so important in our knowledge systems. Like everything is connected. Like we're able to get our land back, we're able to grow our ancestral foods. That means we're able to nurture our communities, to get more Native students in STEM, to build Indigenous hospitals. Like everything is connected. It's like a domino effect. So I think that like, having like one of those aspects would be amazing. But yeah, I think for me, being able to like build an Indigenous medical center would be really awesome. Not that I'm the person to do that, but I think it would be really awesome to have that in the future, just, led by natives and run by Indigenous doctors and physicians and nurses and yeah, people like y'all.
I'm glad you share that. We'll have to connect you with Dr. Donald Warren and the Indigenous School of Medicine work that's being conducted. There's a vision that he has and a statement that he says in the work that he does with working on building that out, that healed healers heal. And that's, really what I envision the future of healthcare and wellness within community care is care that's really rooted within Indigenous ways of knowing, care that feels good when you go to see your provider and you leave and you feel like you've been heard, whether that's like you've had a cup of tea together, you've visited, you've laughed, you've gotten to talk about what it is that's plaguing you, but you don't feel like, that the white coat syndrome or the power dynamics or anything like that, but care that's really genuine, care that's intentional, care that really makes you feel as though you've been heard within the systems that you're in.
I think you guys did such a great job. I envision everything that you all mentioned, everything that was mentioned. That's what I see.
Ah, so beautiful. I appreciate all the knowledge that each of you bring. I am so grateful and thankful to be in the space with you all, even though it's virtual. We'll be in each other's orbits and circles for some time. So Wopila Kanka Chichiapi to the panelists and the audience for joining us today. Um, and as we continue this work, just remembering that or being reminded that health partnerships are not transactional. They're very much relational and built on kinship, which is why in a lot of many Indigenous communities, you'll see them call each other by their kinship terms like Toja or Toshka, niece or nephew, Tui or Lekshi, uncle or auntie. And that's not just a word, it represents a responsibility to each other, because when you call each other by relative names or claim each other by these relative names, then you have a certain responsibility to each other. And so thinking of the ways that you talk about our communities and the ways that you work with our communities will help guide you towards a different responsibility. And Indigenous the Native Governance Center and the ways that they share Indigenous governance and those relationships, they're very sacred to us. And so appreciate everybody for joining, and I will turn it back over to Cree for some closing remarks. Pilamaya yapi. If you guys want to jump off and just say Doksha or Pilamaya or whatever in your language, it'd be beautiful.
Yes, Jimmy Gwetch, I just so appreciate all of the knowledge shared today, all of the stories. And I think something that really resonated for me is that, of course, our speakers are here because they have a lot of care, but I think that's also true for attendees and folks who watch this later on. Folks are tuning in because they want to be good partners, they want to be good relatives. And so I think the more learning opportunities we provide, the better. But also just want to uplift that care that we see within our communities and that we're showing one another and trying to really uplift these different healers, these different leaders, and the really amazing work that's being done across Indian country. So thank you again for those of you attending, but really thank you as well to our speakers and everything that you were able to share today. Just want to again remind folks that we did record this session, so we'll be sharing it out soon. We're also going to work on a written guide to kind of capture some of the quotes and different experiences shared throughout this session and the rest of the events in the series. And we also have a really short survey. So for those of you who attended live, take some time to share your thoughts with us. And if you enjoyed today's event, really start considering how you can be a good relative or a good partner in the work you're doing, in your personal life, and beyond. And we will hopefully hear from you soon, but we hope that today gives you some good next steps for how you can be a good partner or maybe ideas for opportunities to change in the work that you're doing. And so we'll email this survey link out to Zoom attendees, and I'll also post a link in the chat really quickly if folks prefer to complete it that way. But again, just a huge thank you to everyone for attending today, and stay tuned for those future events as well. Next week, we'll have the final session in this series focused on governance partnerships, and you can find more events and free resources on our website. But just many blessings to everyone. Thank you again for attending this session. And Gigawabamin, I hope to see everyone again soon. So Chimiigwech to our speakers. Feel free to give your own see you laters, but thank you for everything you shared with us today.
Doksha.
Doksha K. Pilamayaye.
Chimiigwech, Bama P, Google Wabaman.
Yeah,
Thank you all. Have a beautiful day, and hopefully see you again soon. Miigwech.